So welcome back. I'm sorry to keep sort of harassing you to in, out, in, out. You will get a decent break at lunchtime, but just we've got so much on the agenda and I don't want you to miss anything. So with that, I'd like to invite Tom Smith. Tom is the Executive Director of the American Society of Civil Engineers. I'd invite you to the stage, if I may, sir.
Very good. Thank you all. Greetings, everyone. So first off, it's really nice to meet in a facility where you can see the structural members, the elements here. I know the structural engineers here are trying to calculate stresses and strains and figuring out how this weight is transferred to the foundation of the building. I'm sure we have geotechnical engineers here who are trying to figure out what kind of foundation this weight is transferred to, the piles and the soil types. We've got water engineers, I'm sure, that are thinking about how the drinking water is brought up to this level, this many stories up, and thinking about how the wastewater is transferred and where it's going. And our goal is to make sure that the public understands that too. As you just heard from the mayor, the importance of community engagement and community education is so critical. So at the American Society of Civil Engineers, one of the things we've worked hard on is a report card on America's infrastructure. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were actually founded here in New York City back in 1852. So as we sat at the Consulate General's residence last night, and thank you for that, really was a wonderful reception, we were overlooking our former headquarters at 345 East 47th Street is where we used to be located. We're in a house, in a building there with the mechanicals, the electricals, the chemicals, and the civils, and the mining engineers. We sold that to Donald Trump in the late 1990s, and then we moved down to Reston, Virginia, where we are headquartered, so we can be a little bit closer to Washington, D.C., where we do a fair amount of advocacy. We're not a political organization, but we try to make sure that the public policymakers understand the importance of our infrastructure, investing in our workforce, our technical workforce, and all the work that you all here are doing in the room. So in 1988, there was a study that was called Fragile Foundations, and that was done for the Reagan administration. And there was a report, this was the National Council on Public Works Improvement, they did a report to Congress. And they actually did a report card on infrastructure. And they made a lot of observations similar to what you'll hear about, like we're still seeing today. In fact, they've been exacerbated since the 1980s in many ways in the United States. They said the council recommends a national commitment shared by all levels of government, the private sector, and the public to vastly improve America's infrastructure. Such a commitment could require an increase of up to 100% in the amount of capital the nation invests each year in new and existing public works. So 10 years later, we realized that there was not going to be any further efforts to continue with that metric, with that dashboard, like you talked about the importance of measuring the work that we do. So ASCE started doing a report card on America's infrastructure. So what we do is we put together in a similar format that you, wrong direction, a similar format that you see in school, a simple report card on our infrastructure. We started doing that in 1998. And we release this every 4 years. So this is the most recent report card that we released in 2025. So we released this in March of this year. And you can see it's not a grade that you'd be particularly proud of necessarily to bring home to your parents. We look at a variety of different categories. We look at capacity, condition, funding, future need, operation and maintenance. We look at public safety, resilience, and innovation. And we have over 50 people on a committee on America's infrastructure that work over much more than a year studying a lot of data in each of these categories. We started out with a smaller number of categories. I'll also mention that in addition to this national report card, we do state report cards. So we've got about a dozen of those that'll come out this year where we're analyzing infrastructure on a more localized basis. We've also helped a number of countries adopt infrastructure report cards, including Japan and South Africa. And we were talking with Australia, our section in India. We have over 160,000 members in 177 countries. I know our members in India, we're starting to work on a report card. So this is something that you're seeing more on a global basis. I know the ICE does an infrastructure report and has had a report card, as we've talked, David and I were talking about last night. So we think this is an important educational tool not just for public policymakers, but for the public. We want them to understand the importance of our infrastructure, how it impacts our everyday lives. And you've heard the examples just with the Francis Scott Key Bridge, what happens when we don't focus on our infrastructure. Much of our infrastructure is outdated. It wasn't designed for the stresses and strains that we're putting on it today, for the capacity, for the extreme weather events that we're seeing today. It wasn't designed for that. And so you'll see the Francis Scott Key Bridge is a pretty good example. That was not designed back in the 1970s for post-Panamax ships. And so you're going to see this $2 billion project with this new bridge. It's going to have a wider span. It's going to be taller. You got a cable-stayed bridge, as you heard the Lieutenant Governor talking about. It's a fine civil engineer. So we have an opportunity to do things better. But we need to make sure that we're continuing to invest in this infrastructure. One of the messages we want to make sure we also bring is that this has to be looked at as a system. That's why we look at these 18 categories. You'll see we just added the category of broadband. This was the first time we've done that. One of the challenges we had with broadband was just finding the data that we needed in order to give it a grade. Now you look at these grades and you see it's a C. That's the first time, it's the highest grade we've ever had. Actually, in 2017, it was a C-. Before that, it had been in the D range every single time. So in 2017, we saw some incremental investments, and we saw a raise from a D+ to a C-. This time, obviously, we've seen some pretty significant investment in our infrastructure, and we've gone from a C- to a C. We know that if we continue to invest, we can make incremental change. Again, it's incremental. Small things, celebrate the little things. Not a grade you'd be proud of, but as you look at those grades, you can see 8 of them went up. So that's pretty good. But 9 of them are still in the D range. So that's obviously, again, nothing to write home about. People also often like to ask about, what are the highest grades, what are the lowest grades? You can see the lowest grades, stormwater and transit, are tied for a D. Although transit actually increased since the last report card from a D-, so that's a positive. 2 categories, energy and rail, had grade declines, and those went down due to safety and capacity concerns. The shift to renewable energy is bringing new sources online. So when you look at energy, while we've had some additional sources of energy brought online, we've had additional demands on our energy system. And you can think about AI and the heat pumps and electric vehicles and the additional demands that we're putting on our energy system. All of that is outpacing the increases that we have made in supply. So surging energy demands with data centers and have really increased and caused our energy sector investment needs to skyrocket since 2021. We now face a 10-year investment gap of $600 billion in the energy sector to meet the demands and safeguard the grid from extreme weather events and cyber attacks. And obviously we've seen, even in Texas, where we've seen, was it Uri, the winter storm, where we saw the significant impacts on weather, on energy systems, transportation systems, and you can look all across the country, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes or tornadoes, and we're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that we're learning from those events and incorporating that into our standards. So when we do invest these monies, that we're doing it in a way that is future ready, future looking, and going to be resilient. So what's the gap? We have a $3.7 trillion infrastructure investment gap between 2024 and 2033. That's up from $2.6 trillion that was identified in the 2021 report card. So again, funding from laws like the Infrastructure and Jobs Act have proven to be major achievements to jumpstart our ability to help close these gaps. We look at our infrastructure today. The condition of our infrastructure really imposes a hidden tax on all American families. So it's a $2,000. We did an economic study called Bridging the Gap. We used to call it Failure to Act, but we actually did invest. So we now call it Bridging the Gap. And how do we bridge that gap? But every American family pays about $2,000 a year because of our inadequate infrastructure, mediocre infrastructure that needs attention. And if we don't continue with the IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure law investments, we see that gap going up to $2,700, another $700 a year. Again, we did an economic study, and you can find that on our website, Failure to Act. So that's the hidden tax we pay when we fail to invest in our infrastructure. So we want to make sure that the public understands that you don't really have a choice. You know, we have to invest in this infrastructure. It has to be prioritized. It's our quality of life. It's our life itself that is dependent on our infrastructure. And when we don't, we're going to pay, ultimately. So, you know, the Key Bridge was a good example. You know, that's you know, as you heard, a $2 billion project, but look at the economic costs when that bridge is out of commission. And 40,000 vehicles aren't traveling on that bridge at this time and have to detour. And when you shut down the port for a period of time. So those are significant costs on this infrastructure system. So what do we do about it? ASC is mostly focused on solutions. You know, we like to identify the problem, but we're really mostly focused on how do we solve it. And sustaining investment is critical. We know that this $3.7 trillion investment gap, and I'll mention that that's not just the federal government, that's federal, state, and local governments. We'll be talking about private sector as well, because that's also part of this equation, and how you finance these. We've been very concerned about maintaining the municipal bond tax exemption. Right now, the current tax bill does not include eliminating that tax exemption. We think that's important because that would also increase these costs even more for infrastructure. We have to prioritize resiliency and making sure that our infrastructure is resilient and future-looking. That's been a real concern. Much of this infrastructure, again, was designed and built many, many years ago. The Key Bridge is not that old a bridge, really, in bridge speaking. You've got over 600,000 bridges in the United States, and I think the average age is over 60. So, you know, we have to make sure that these bridges are resilient, that we're maintaining them, and that means making sure also that we have the data that we need to analyze our infrastructure and the sensors that are being required. And we have all that technology, but we need to implement it. Prioritizing our policy and innovation is also important, and making sure that we are investing and also that that there's an understanding of the importance of our infrastructure. So we spend a lot of time on innovation. Our standards are, again, a part of that equation. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the panel. With that, I'll say thank you for your time. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to asce.org or infrastructurereportcard.org. You can find a lot of detail on this report card. There's a lot of data, voluminous reports on each of these categories of infrastructure. And then again, you can also drill down on state report cards if you're interested in that as well. And I look forward to having some further discussion with you all. And thanks very much for your time.
Good, thank you. Take a seat. So I'd like to also invite up Elizabeth, Gordon, and QC. To the panel, and I'll explain what they're about to do. You'll see this is labeled on the agenda as Twin Talks. So hopefully some of you understand what Twin Talks is. It's been taking place here in New York by Rory and in Washington. Obviously today is a great event, but we just don't want to do one event, but we can't do 4 of these in New York every year. So we have these breakout panel sessions called Twin Talks, where we take people up and they're moderated and questions are asked. So one of the good reasons to stay in touch with Rory to find out when the next one is. So, the floor is yours. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Is this on? Is this on?
Is that?
Push it up.
Push it up, yeah.
Let's try. Yep. It should be on.
Hello, hello? Yep. Yes. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bentley and Rory, for having me here. I have to say, the first couple of talks this morning were fantastic. And then, Tom, that was great to see what the scorecard, this year's scorecard. And I will say, if any of you haven't actually taken a look at the scorecard, it is well worth going to that website and taking a look, because there's a huge wealth of really important information there. So thank you. Thank you, ASCE. This panel is actually going to, I think, try to bridge those first 2 talks. The Lieutenant Governor ended her talk saying, really, what's very important is understanding community needs and being able to adapt our infrastructure to those needs as they change through time. And then, of course, the second talk, where it was really about that interface of the infrastructure sector and community, and in particular the workforce. And then we heard about the state of infrastructure in the U.S. So what we want to do now is maybe drill down a little bit in the U.S. to this question of improving infrastructure for community and really focus on the community aspect. And we're, in particular, looking for maybe some best practices, ideas, policies internationally that maybe could come to the U.S., but also here in the U.S., maybe at local or state level or individual projects which really have a much broader application. So I am going to, of course, just lost my, I'm going to start with you, Tom, and just kind of pick up where you left off with the benchmark. So thinking about what you just presented, but at the local level infrastructure, what are those urgent needs facing communities? And then also, what are the barriers to being able to find those needs and address them?
Yeah, I think at the community level, yeah, I've got one.
Oh,
so,
you've got
yeah.
it. Yeah.
It's, we've got this idea of community engagement that you heard, I think is so critical, making sure that the community really understands the importance of infrastructure and the need to invest in it. And honestly, the need to pay for it, that all of us who use infrastructure have got to pay for infrastructure. And so it seems like everybody's used to paying for entertainment and Netflix and all these different things. But when it comes to infrastructure, we sort of take it for granted. And people need to understand that there's a cost to it. And I think if we can educate them to that, I mean, in fact, usually when we do, they're willing to invest in it. You heard the bond referendum that the mayor referenced. That's not unusual. Because people know that this is important, but it does take education. The other thing we do, I mentioned standards. So we spend a lot of time publishing standards, technical standards. We've got over 70 of them that we bring together, like ASC 7 or a minimum design standard. We have over 500 people that are working on that standard, experts, whether it's working on seismic or snow or wind, or and looking at how we design our infrastructure to be resilient. And we have to, then it gets adopted into a building code, but then it has to get adopted into state building codes. So if it's not, and some of these, you're going to have local building codes that are behind, and they're using an outdated version of a standard. And so again, it's education, and people understand that yes, there's a cost to this, but it's worth the cost, because when you invest $1 up front, it saves you. And many studies have shown this, but there's one from the Chamber of Commerce that came out. National Institute of Building Sciences have come out. When you invest $1 up front, it saves up to $13 on the back end. So people, when they understand that, I think they're willing to invest.
I'll just say from a personal perspective, I'm outside my day job. I'm the chair of our local planning commission in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
I love it.
And this is exactly the problem. In fact, we're going through budgets, and they haven't paid for their roads in so many years, and the cost just keeps going up. As you know, roads will only get more expensive if you ignore them. But nobody's heard of the scorecard at the local level, or perhaps even in much of the state. How do you bridge that communication gap to get it to those local levels?
And by the way, I spent my morning yesterday on a zoning board in Fairfax County. I've been done that for 15 years, because it's just good to be involved in your local community.
You see when theory and practice don't quite come together.
One of the things we've had a fair amount of luck with the report card is getting media coverage. It's gotten extensive media coverage, and it's quoted routinely by members of Congress. I remember the president quoting it before, President Obama using it. I think it was at a State of the Union speech. Hopefully we'll get that done in this cycle as well. We had over 2 billion online impressions this year. With this report card. We've never had the kind of media coverage that we've had this time. So that helps to get the word out. One of the things we're also doing is we've teamed up with the American Council of Engineering Companies, the American Public Works Association, and we're doing media roadshows. So we've done over 15 of those this year. We've got a half a dozen more coming. And we've been going around the country highlighting infrastructure projects. So all of us do awards. We do a Standing Civil Engineering Achievement Award. A lot of our associations do, but we're trying to get more media coverage for it. And so whether it's water projects, transportation projects, and we're having members of Congress participate with us. Tim Kaine was with us at the Shed down in, he's a senator for Virginia in Richmond when we did that one. We've done Dallas, we did a water pump flood protection project. So we just 2 weeks ago we were out at the zoo in Minneapolis on a sort of a transportation project there, believe it or not. So we're spending a lot of time educating people about what we do. We also, by the way, have released last year, an IMAX film called Cities of the Future. So that's playing in, it'll be 36 theaters around the country. There'll be a lot more coming. It's playing in theaters around the world. And it's got an education guide associated with it, 100-page hands-on activities and lesson plans that you can use in schools, so people can see what engineers do. And we showcase Singapore, Amsterdam, Los Angeles, and so we're showing cities of the future by existing cities that have been forward-looking. And so we're spending a lot of time educating people. I think that's one of the key things, is that prioritizing our infrastructure, making sure people know that we need to pay for it, all of us who use it. And an IMAX film is one way on a big 3D screen like that, is one way to get it across.
That's great. So now zooming up at the larger level, also actually back to my day job, one of the projects I was involved in that was launched 2 years ago was with the Economist Impact and Deloitte. It's called Infrastructure for Good, and it was ranking countries as to their enabling environment, infrastructure ecosystem that would actually result in infrastructure that is serving economic needs and empowerment, but also protecting the environment and providing social needs and is resilient, et cetera. And so the barometer, when it came out, placed the U.S. in 9th out of 30 countries, which isn't horrible. These are essentially large countries across the globe of different economic status, although mostly high-income countries. And Canada was number one, and there were 5 different pillars: governance and planning, financial, sustainable finance and investment, economic benefits and empowerment, environmental sustainability and resilience, and in particular for this panel, social and community impact. And in that case, actually the US did a little better. It was up to, I think, 6th place. And that was things like social assessments and progress, community engagement, which actually the US did quite well compared to these other countries, protections for workers, access to public services, et cetera. So, Gordon, I want to turn to you. You've worked, and MACE works all over the world. You know, you're currently in a big project here in New York, but tell us about some of the examples, whether in the UK or Middle East, that really come back to this question of infrastructure and community.
Great, thank you. Can people hear me okay? Perfect, thank you. So Gordon Alexander, you'll pick up from the accent. I'm from the UK. I've been over in New York for just slightly over a year now. And firstly, I really love that connection between infrastructure and community. And if I think back to just when I joined Hudson Tunnel last March, Chris Kaluri was the chief executive of Gateway Development Commission at that time. And there were around 110 of us started on day one. And Chris was explaining the program to us before we became his delivery partner. Chris didn't talk about 10 huge contracts or billions of dollars. Chris told a little story about his parents when they came over from India. And they were highly qualified, but they didn't have jobs. But they lived in a region that had a train line. And the train line was about access to opportunity. So, my sort of first thought with your question is, I think it's really important that leaders in infrastructure are considering why are we building the infrastructure? And it's exciting to work on jobs with lots of zeros when you see the invoices coming through. But fundamentally, infrastructure is about creating opportunity for people and for areas. So I think there's a behavioural piece to this. I think in terms of where that then takes my thinking is a couple of areas. One is how do we select which infrastructure projects we're going to fund? And I completely agree with you that infrastructure needs to be paid for. but funding's not an infinite source, and therefore there's got to be a decision-making process that says, of all the jobs that we could do, which ones are we then going to proceed with? If I reflect in the UK, when I started my career 20 odd years ago, it was a very economic decision. So the UK went through a long time. They called it the BCR, the benefit cost ratio, and essentially, if the benefits didn't outweigh the costs by a ratio of 2.5 to 1, your project was killed. And that started to drive a behaviour where areas of the country which were already economically successful tended to have higher benefit cost ratios than the areas of the country that actually the politicians of the day wanted to invest in and wanted to promote. So there was a kind of almost like fundamental flaw in the investment decision-making process, that the more economic benefit you generated, the more likely the project was to go ahead, and therefore that was easiest to demonstrate in areas that were already benefiting economically. So there was a change made, and actually probably knows this better, about 5 years ago, 4 years ago-ish. And it's not that there's a disregard for the economics or the affordability, but there's now a consideration about how does the infrastructure proposal align to the government or the day or the administration of the day's policies. And therefore, if economic rebalancing and creating opportunity in different regions is important, then that in and of itself becomes a reason to make that investment. So I think that there's got to be some consideration of what do we want to achieve through infrastructure, and how does that then get reflected into the economic or the decision-making process. I can contrast that slightly with the MIS experience in the Middle East, which is a much more a managed economy. But so if you look at the levels of investment that come through from Saudi Aramco, clearly there's a government there. Sorry, thank you. Clearly there's a government there which is looking at what does a post-oil economy look like, and how does it plan for creating that future economy. So again, a completely different decision-making framework, but a decision-making framework that is driven by and informed by where do we want infrastructure to get us to beyond the pure math of what the economic return is going to be for any individual infrastructure asset. So I think how we lean into those decision frameworks to get what we want to get out of infrastructure is really important. And then the last bit for me is around, again, money's a finite resource. We've got to get the biggest bang for a buck. And therefore, I know we'll come on to talk a little bit more about different delivery models and different approaches to executing infrastructure. But we've got to find ways to do more for the money that we have, and whether that's relying on technology, and lots of the people in this room will be in that space, but how do we increase the levels of productivity for the infrastructure work that we have to make sure that we maximise the returns on investment for those projects that we want to take forward.
Really interesting. Just thinking about this last example where you compared it against Middle East, where much more top-down, but that sort of planning and investment also allows one to think about systems of systems rather than at the individual project level. Are there ways to bring more systems-based thinking into a place like the U.S. that could perhaps borrow from some of this sort of bigger top-down? How could we pull that in better?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me again? There we go. Thank you. Yes, I think absolutely. And you talked a little bit about cities for the future, and I think that there's a big part in there around, what is a city going to be? Because obviously a lot of these infrastructure programs that we look at have fairly long durations before that capability is available to, it's often measured in decades, and therefore I think we've got to extend that planning horizon out to, what are those cities and systems going to be in, now we're thinking about the 2040s, the 2050s, and the second half of the century. So, I think the Cities for the Future is a really important initiative to have that vision, and then be able to compare what does my blueprint for the city look like, about which programs do I initiate in what order, so that I can get the incremental benefit always tied to, where's my vision taking me, of the city, and what does that mean for the economy and future jobs and the residents of that city as we go forward into the future. So I think there's got to be an overarching vision that supports the decision making. So I think yes to the planning question.
Okay, great, thanks. And QC, on to you. I know you focus a lot on project delivery, innovation, public-private partnerships. A lot of this really is closely connected with how do you serve community needs. What examples can you give, or what insights that from the really wide array of projects that you've been involved in?
So I probably want to really follow the conversation you have here. Is Gordon talk about the top-down decision-making process in the United States too. Probably most of the countries that follow that. And I think the IIJA law that made an experiment, I would probably say that. And this is the first time that in the United States that we're trying to really implement this the bottom-up approach to really select the project. If you remember the IIJA law, so just within the transportation field, there are more than $190 billion available directly. The federal government to fund the project at the local level instead of passing through the state. And you can see that, and over the years, that the local government has been very actively to pursue these federal funds that they never has the opportunity to get access. And our Build America Center has been working with so many local governments, and we never seen this kind of passion that they are building smaller project, because most of the time when you do select the project following this top-down structure, and the big money goes to the big project, just because at the local level and the smaller project probably would be benefited the community more. However, that will not really be the high priority for the politicians there. So the IIJA law actually, I probably would say that it's the first time that the Congress conducted this experiment, in fact. And we definitely need to evaluate how this kind of approach really affect the community and bring the infrastructure project and also the service to the community at the local level. And how does that do we do a good job on that, and how do we really improve? So I think that's the one of the critical elements of the IIJA law implementation over the past 3 years, and definitely that's one thing I think that we all need to really investigate and see what actually work and how we can improve this kind of decision-making process there.
So I won't ask you to give a grade, even though you're from academia, like the scorecard on IIJA. But one of the byproducts of going straight to the local level that I've been following is one of the equity concerns, that small municipalities that don't have a great ability both to procure, to even submit proposals, because federal grants are not so easy to obtain or spend them once they have them. How do you address that issue? How do you improve that?
So yeah, it's actually exactly the challenges that at the beginning, back in 2022, when the IIJA law enact and start the implementation process. So fortunately that within the IIJA law, there are tremendous money also available to provide the technical assistance to the local government. We are part of that. So Build America Center that we are running, even I'm a professor, and our Build America Center funded by the US DOT, and we provide the technical assistance directly to the local government. And at the beginning, when we talked to, I made a cold call to some small county, cities, township, the city manager, city mayors, that they only have one person in the city, just the city mayors in charge of the entire infrastructure project there. So we made a cold call, and we provide a free service, help them to really develop the grant application package, help them to identify the project, And then they see that actually they can receive the money from the federal government, and they are convinced that they actually can really benefit from this IIJA law. So that's the reason that we have been working diligently with so many local government, and also we built, we call it coalitions, and including more than 15 university. So they all provide this kind of service to the local government there. So that's one way. But I do know that there are so many companies and private company that has been contracted with the federal government to provide the technical assistance directly to local government. Yeah.
Great. We're at Duke University. We're working with a small town in North Carolina where the mayor also has a half-time job running the local coffee shop, and the one other employee of the town does maintenance and everything else, and they have a huge stormwater problem, and they don't have any capacity for any level without involvement of the state and groups like yours, or et cetera. So I want to go to a second topic. Keep moving to, this one is on resilience, infrastructure resilience. I noted in the scorecard that of the 3 big sort of priorities moving forward, that was one of them, and it was something that hasn't received the attention in earlier scorecards. It was really, I think, new the way it's been highlighted. Tom, could you speak a little bit more about what you see innovative happening in this space at the state or local level, particularly as it relates back to communities?
Sure, yeah, we're spending a lot of time working with government agencies. NOAA, we have a workshop with NOAA taking place the first week of June. We've had a partnership with them, as well as the University of Maryland, where and we've been working with NIST. We work with FEMA. We rely on them for the science and the data that we need to incorporate into our standards so that our infrastructure can be more resilient. As I mentioned, we're seeing more extreme weather events. You can see examples across the country, but we need the data for, we need working with the Atlas 15 data that will be coming out for rainfall, sea level rise, temperature, all of those things. That's all information that we need to incorporate into our standards. And again, we want to make sure that people understand that by investing in this, it does save. I mean, Gordon gave the example of the Gateway, a tunnel. I mean, that's, yes, $16 billion project, but imagine the cost. When Hurricane Sandy came through and it's flooded, imagine the cost if that 100-plus-year-old tunnel is no longer in operation. Or there's another tunnel I came through on Amtrak on my way here, which was the Baltimore Potomac, and that goes back to the 1870s. That was just after the Civil War. It's being realigned and is going to be rebuilt. But I've been going through that tunnel for years, from the 1870s. So what happens? There's a huge cost with GDP. Gordon can tell you about that. So we got to make sure we're getting that message across. That's part of resilience, is making sure that we're prepared for that. But it's incorporating that data, the science, into our standards.
So data is absolutely key.
Yeah.
Gordon, I'm sure you have something to say about the tunnel, but also would like to hear, what are other countries doing? What could we borrow that you're seeing maybe in the UK or elsewhere?
Thank you. I'll pick up Tom's point there just very quickly. So the Gateway Development Commission did that study to shut the existing North River tunnel to do the refurb was a $16 billion hit to the economy. So basically, for roughly the same cost, you can build a new tunnel, which means we get a brand new tunnel, not a 117-year-old tunnel, plus you get the resilience that when we go back and refurb the North River tunnel, so you get additional reliability plus resilience, and then as part of the wider Gateway program, you open up the possibility for a capacity increase. So, and really to your point in terms of, how do we think about these things internationally? I think particularly in the sustainability space, one of the misperceptions is that these solutions cost more money. And of course, if you try to retrofit them, or these are changes which come in late into the design, any change that comes in late, is going to be more expensive than executing it. If you're building these into your planning processes, and it's the first thing you think of in terms of, I want sustainable long-term solutions, I want resilient solutions, and that's going into your planning, it doesn't cost more. So I think it's the sooner that you have these requirements and work towards them, it minimises the cost impact and often eliminates the cost impact. The other bit I'd reflect on in the UK, and look, as somebody who really enjoys working and building these massive infrastructure programs, and on the one hand, you look at, we had a very large tunnelling contract in Lower Thames Crossing. It had to resubmit the equivalent of its EIS, which incurred a delay. There was a very large infrastructure project planned to add an extra runway at Heathrow, which is the main airport in London, which was successfully challenged through court. So, where UK has net zero instantiated into law, then there was a successful court challenge to say this programme does not demonstrably satisfy that legal requirement. And on the one hand, I can be frustrated that, I'd love to go and work in these big, nationally significant programmes, but I like the fact that we've got that legal and regulatory framework that says you've got to demonstrate you've done the thinking first. You've got to demonstrate that the thinking's been done and that all those checks and balances are built before the investment commitment's made, before we mobilise thousands of people out onto site to do the job. So I think there's possibly something in there about where are the checks and balances kicking in as part of that decision-making process to make sure we've got a solid plan to then go and execute.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience, and you might need these. Steal one mic, and please raise your hand if you want a quick question for QC while we're collecting the questions, and that is, has the IIJA improved in its addressing resilience in its
there are so many programs there, focusing on the resilience there. So starting from emission reduction there to so I can name so many programs, protect program that help the local government. We work with municipal MTA, so transportation MTC commissions there in San Francisco. So they have State Road 37 that is basically receive some federal funds under the IIJA to elevate the roadway to eliminate the flooding issues there. So there are so many, and others low carbon transportation material program, $2 billion available for that. And we work with Salt Lake City. We work with the city of Chicanota to help them to reduce the emission there. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I guess a question for all the panelists, maybe starting with you, Tom, if you don't mind. At the report card launch, of which, of course, Bentley was a proud sponsor of, Chairman Sam Graves was talking and was quite candid, I think, in the notion that his committee may return to a traditional infrastructure law when the surface bill needs to be reauthorized next year. Inferring and sort of reading in between those lines that means that IIJA is in fact atypical of MAP 21 and Safety Lou and the FAST Act. Not just in the allowing state and localities to receive some of that funding, but in the kinds of things, the scale and breadth that the IIJA funded: energy, water, cybersecurity. A lot of the stuff that you had up on your chart that received really poor grades. If we return to a traditional surface bill, and I think all signs are pointing in that direction, where does that leave some of the other verticals that we discussed? Not roadways, which receive the majority of the money, both in IIJA and, of course, in other surface transportations. We're in the capital of high finance right now. Does that leave more of a innovative private sector P3 design build model for those other verticals? Do you return to more of a federated type of thing where you actually really invest in the state and localities? What do you do if 1/3 of the money that we've been enjoying for the past 3.5 years and the next 18 months is now suddenly gone?
Well, the first thing we do is we all pay an additional $700 a year in a greater hidden tax as a consequence. And so I think that's going to be a real concern. I mean, I was with Congressman Graves just 2 weeks ago at that TCC fly-in, and I think there was he talked about it too. I mean, we haven't raised our gas tax since 1993. And so that's another one of the concerns. If you look at our transportation networks and the money that's going in, we don't have enough money coming in to pay for it because we're not, while the states have increased their taxes, the federal government has not. And at the same time, we've got more fuel-efficient vehicles, we've got more electric vehicles. And so he talked about the need for some type of, whether it's a VMT or some fee associated with it, to help fund it. And ASE would certainly support that. Because we know that we need some type of, whether it's a gas tax or it's a user fee, VMTs, I think that's going to be important. So I heard, a very open mind to that, to our questions from Congressman Graves. And I certainly think that that's going to be necessary. We're going to have to change our thinking because we have to sustain this level of funding. That $3.7 trillion gap that I showed, that's with IIJA funding. So it gets even worse, and you're going to watch this gap continue to grow. It's not sustainable. And so that's the message that we're carrying. We're spending a lot of time with, and a huge thanks to Bentley for your support of the Solution Summit and just being a partner along the way with this. But we're going to have to really carry that message.
So I can probably say that we definitely need a multiple approach. So the gasoline tax is definitely not sufficient because increasing gasoline tax at federal, at the state level, most of the politicians would not take that risk because when you talk to the public and nobody wants to really pay more tax. So, you raised the news that the Congress is, targeting EV fees there, which actually is a good way to consider some different, because EV, of course, I'm driving Tesla there, so, and I personally think that, of course, we haven't really, for EV drivers, haven't really paid the fair share on the roadway maintenance there. And the other here is that we definitely need to consider all the innovative financing approach to accelerate the project delivery. So we have been talking to so many local governments there. I mean, they just don't have that mindset to finance the project first, because they always waiting for the funding, and which actually you see that over the past 3-4 years during the pandemic. I mean, the construction cost probably, I would say, increased at least 30-40%. And if you delay that, the project construction there, and in the project has got the cost grows. And we have an example from the Building Market Bureau TIFIA office there that excellent, I don't want to name the local government there. So back in 2010 that they were trying to really use the TIFIA loan to build their infrastructure project. And then they did not really have that intention. And then 10 years later, the project cost actually 3 or 4 times higher than what they actually expected at that time. So you consider the community service. If they can really, leverage all the innovative financing tool available to the local government, and they can provide the better service way before they actually have the funding to do so. And that's probably the way that we all need to really consider. How do we really educate the local government, the local official, and see there's all kinds of tools available for them that they can deliver their project faster, quicker, and better.
Can I just quickly add on that vehicle mile, on the tax? Nobody, neither side, right or left, has been willing to increase the gas tax because it's an added tax. But if we eliminated the gas tax and then at the same time added some type of administrative fee per vehicle or VMT, there's maybe they're going to have to do something. And we're going to have to figure out a way to make that politically, palatable.
General fund transfers every time.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much. I know there are lots more questions, and so I think it's going to have to be over lunch.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. So with that, I'd like to invite Tom to the stage. I will
Just go for it.
just go for it. You're mic'd up.
I've got to turn my Got to
turn
turn
it
my
on.
mic on. There we go.
You're good.
I think we're on.
It's all yours, sir.
Wonderful. All right. Give it a minute. Good morning, everybody. Good to be to see. Oh, is this on? Oh, do I need to click that? Oh, who's that guy? There we go. Okay. Great to see everybody. Great to be here. Rory, congrats on a great room. You've really assembled so many friends and colleagues, and I'm glad to be here with everybody. So, you know, it's also really exciting to see the momentum carrying forward from Infrastructure Week. That's what we were all immersed in last week down in DC, where many colleagues here and I and others were talking about the federal landscape for infrastructure investment. Builds great off the question that David just asked and we were just talking about here, and gearing up for discussions on reauthorization next year. You know, I was thinking back to when IIJA first passed in November 2021 doesn't seem all that long ago to me, and it really wasn't that long ago. We were all kind of getting together with each other. I was at the National Governors Association at the time, convening states and territories and everybody talking about how we were going to implement this new era of infrastructure and what this new era of infrastructure was going to look like. And now we're here again talking about another 5-year investment cycle from the federal government, whatever form that may take, to continue this important work. And at the same time, I think we've really watched our infrastructure evolve and how we think about how we invest in the community, what our infrastructure does for people's lives, for the broader economic, environmental, and social ecosystem. And as I've thought through this, I've really kind of come to appreciate 2 consistent truths in infrastructure investment: big numbers and long time horizons. And I think both are really important. I think we have a great discussion pretty consistently about the numbers, about the amount that we need to invest, about the amount that things are going to cost, about kind of getting things done on time and on budget. But I feel like the latter portion, that long time horizon perspective, is something that might not get enough attention that it should. I've been really happy to have joined Meridiam. I've just been there a few months. Really appreciated the comments from the Lieutenant Governor this morning about imposter syndrome, because I'm a policy guy who has been thrust into the world of engineers and finance people, and I walk around every day not understanding what anybody's saying, but starting to, you know, get a little bit used to it. But I've really come to appreciate the fact that at Meridiam, we think in generations. As we invest in infrastructure alongside our partners in the states and local governments, we're keenly aware that today's infrastructure investments are as much, or probably more so, for the benefit of future generations as they are for us today. And so, you know, it makes sense that while we're having these quinquennial, by the way, every 5 years, I looked it up, conversations about the backdrop or about our federal investments, we're doing so in rooms like this with the backdrop of what our longer term visions are and what we want our communities to look like and how we're going to use the tools to invest in that. I really appreciated those comments last night when we were at the British Consulate residence about how we're addressing longer, historical underinvestment with new tools, because I think that that's really important in how we do this. Meridiam's just hitting our 20-year anniversary, and I think over the last 20 years, we've become a premier provider of sustainable infrastructure that focuses on improving people's lives. We operate globally across sustainable transportation, energy, social infrastructure in the US, Canada, Europe, and Africa. We're somewhat unique in the space of infrastructure investment in that we play a hands-on role in our projects at every stage. Like I said, most of the people I work with are engineers, and we have the financing piece as well. But we do so for the long term, and we are long-term investors through the entire life cycle of the project and haven't ever kind of sold out portions of any project that we've been involved in. We stick with it through the long term, and I think that that's really important because here in the US, we've gone through so many of these conversations. We've gone through several 5-year surface transportation reauthorization cycles. We've gone through changes in energy legislation, tax legislation, a great recession, global pandemics, everything else that has impacted our state and federal infrastructure investments. But one thing that has remained constant is our long-term, patient capital support for sustainable infrastructure that through thick and thin, through all those changes, really improves the communities and people's lives. And I think it's a thing about this model that I like to talk about that is most misunderstood. And I think too often we are captured by the notion of on time and on budget being a complete success, and then we're good and we can walk away and everything's great. And I think that that's great, and I think that that's very, very important, and we need to keep doing that, and we do that on our projects. But we also go further to make sure that what we're investing in can stand the test of time. And I commend Rory for kind of putting those notions together in settings like this, because it's about the investment on the front end and it's about the investment on the long term as well. And I've been visiting over the last few months our projects. I was just down at the Port of Miami Tunnel, which was one of our earlier projects. It's been open for a little over 10 years now. And if folks are unfamiliar with Miami, the Port of Miami is an island in the bay there. Not a lot of room to grow, but a lot of traffic coming out of the port right into downtown. And so for years, there was all this truck traffic right into downtown Miami. And what we did was we created a solution for the state of Florida that created a tunnel that would divert that traffic right onto the adjoining highways. And as a friend of ours likes to say, Bill Hansen, he said, it let Miami be Miami again. And we're proud to talk about how we delivered that project on time, ahead of schedule, under budget, how we use local, diverse union labor to do the job, how we give back to the community. But one of the things I found really impressive when I was down there was they have these massive floodgates that are more expensive than anybody would invest in. They're over-engineered. Everybody at the time were like, why are you putting this much money into these floodgates? You're not going to need them. They're not going to be worth the investment. But I think those voices I think were proved wrong pretty quickly. And then the fact that we invested in those was the fact that we were going to be maintaining that project for 40 years. And when you're doing something for a 40-plus year time investment, you're going to make those investments because in the long run, it's going to make so much sense. And if we're just investing for now to get it done with, then we can do that. But I think that the power of patient, intentional, dedicated private capital can have on the built environment is just that. It's the investing for the long term that I think is so important. So, I know that the other backdrop here is about resilient infrastructure. I know that there's broad consensus around the need for resilient infrastructure across all levels of government. And when that infrastructure is built to stand the test of time, everybody wins. And ultimately, I think that we play less catch up when we do that. When we don't have things like deferred maintenance to kind of go back to Washington again and again asking for additional dollars for. If we're maintaining the infrastructure that we invest in, then we're going to be able to build more in the long run. A couple other things that we do, we've got a portfolio of managed lanes and toll road projects all across the U.S. I really enjoyed the Lieutenant Governor's perspective this morning. A road isn't just a road anymore. A sidewalk's not just a sidewalk. What we're doing, particularly on the managed lanes, is you're creating something that is an active role in somebody's life. Everything that we do is an active, managed, dynamic, and my favorite word in infrastructure, reliable impact aspect of somebody's life every day as they're going to work, as they're going to pick up their kids, as they're going home. These are hours saved that we are providing for people in their lives. That really makes a difference. It was great to be here in New York. I really enjoy coming to New York. I'm a New Yorker. Flew into LaGuardia yesterday. I don't know. Last time I flew into LaGuardia, it was not great. It's better now. It's pretty amazing what the team has done over there. That was another one, and I know we've got our friends over at JFK here in the room as well. The impact that these long-term investments are making on these airports are really, really critical. resilience was a big factor over the JFK project, and also kind of doing that while the airport was running. If you haven't been there, or if you go now, kind of maybe take another look at it from this angle of, they built that airport on top of an existing functioning airport while it was operating, seamlessly allowing the existing terminal to keep running planes in and out, serving 16 million passengers, I think, during construction. So the innovations that came from that and the resilience that came from that, the fact that they kind of built it on top, it's a few stories elevated, there's these island concourses that allow more taxiway flow, shorter taxiway runway time, and get planes in and out of there a lot more quicker, is kind of intentional both for the functionality of construction, but also for long-term operations. It was great to see Lieutenant Governor here today, and also Mayor of San Antonio. In Texas, we're actually providing, we're proud to be providing 25% of the water for the city of San Antonio. And we do so in partnership with the San Antonio water system, with sustainability at the forefront of our collaboration. In Maryland, we're building the Purple Line, a 16-mile, 21-station light rail line that's connecting growing communities, providing connecting educational and transit hubs, driving economic development. I was recently out there, and we're making really great progress, so hopefully that will be done soon. And I'm really excited about the prospect of continued dialogue at the federal level with folks in this room. I'm excited about the contributions that patient, long-term private capital can make in this next era of infrastructure investment. And I'm excited to be here today for this conversation. So I just want to say, Rory, Bentley, Ross, everybody, you guys have been organizing really great conversations around this here in DC, all over the world apparently. So, congratulations on that. And I'm really excited to get into some conversation with my friend David here from SIP. And I think that's me, and then that's us, right? This is going to be us now?
Thank you, Tom.
All right, Mark.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Really good. So please do take a seat.
All right.
And there I will now ask David, Kumail, and Ellie to join us on the stage. Hey, how you doing? Pretty good. How are you? Not bad. Really good to see you.
What's up? Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right.
Lovely. Good to see
Hey,
you.
All right.
Right. Well, I will, David,
you.
I will leave you to press ahead. Feel free to take questions from the floor and engage where possible.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to follow that great both the great intro from Tom just now, but also really to segue a bit into thinking about how those of us like myself who are in the private sector can play a role in addressing some of the big gaps that we've been talking about. So we've heard some very inspiring stories from public sector leaders to start the day, including Lieutenant Governor Miller talking about responding to a real acute crisis, and Mayor Nirenberg talking about some of the great work in San Antonio that's addressing long-term challenges and opportunities for that city. And one of the things that's resonated with me is that this is not, it is a financial question to some degree, right? We heard from Tom at ASCE about the $3.7 trillion gap. But there's also a gap when it comes to thinking about the partnerships that are needed, the people that are needed, and the ways that those people can work together to deliver the results. I also really appreciated Tom's highlighting of that this is not just about big numbers, but it's also long term. I think that is a theme we'll continue to return to. So I'm David Guilford. I'm head of policy and strategic partnerships for Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners, or SIP for short. I get to work with entrepreneurs that are building new technologies, but also with civic leaders who are looking to improve broadband, to deal with energy crises, to help improve their transportation systems. But I found that for me, one of the most personally rewarding parts of the job has been engaging with local leaders and thinking about how to solve what sometimes a disconnect between the role that private sector partners could play and what they often do play. And so I'm really thrilled to be joined in this panel by some leaders who think across silos, whether it's about institutional silos, about what a single department typically does, or about the role of the public sector versus the private sector and how those two can work together. And also want to recognize the importance of gatherings like this. I've had the pleasure of participating in a couple of these twin talks, but to see this group of leaders in this room today really is inspiring. So I guess Tom Curtin needs no introduction because he just spoke. But I think in addition to his role at Meridian, I had the chance to get to know him through his leadership at National Governors Association on the infrastructure program. Also, very honored to be joined by Camilo Arroyo, Chief Accessibility Officer for the MTA, but also the Senior Advisor to the President and CEO, and Eli Dagger from Accenture, Executive Vice President for Infrastructure and Capital Projects. So maybe to start with, Tom, could you, based on either your Meridian and or NGA experience, talk about the sort of the trends that you're seeing about how private capital can be leveraged, and what are some of the lessons that you're seeing, whether from your work in the U.S. or Meridian's global presence?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. I think it's the P3 and private investment landscape has been continuously evolving and maturing over the years, and I think that settings like this and through the National Governors Association, U.S. Conference of Mayors, other organizations provide a really good setting for collaboration and best practice sharing that I think has been really successful over the years. One of the things that I've been seeing lately is there are pretty robust market out there for these managed lanes projects. I mentioned some of those in our existing portfolio, and I've been seeing so many state DOT colleagues from different states getting together and really learning from each other, diving into the details on what their experiences have been, how they can structure different projects, how they can feed those into the larger, broader system of what they're operating in. And I think that that's been really encouraging because that best practice sharing is, look, I spent my entire career, it seems like, building state capacity. I'm a state capacity evangelist. Like, it's so important. And we're at this place where we're kind of rethinking what we are as partners, what we are as states and localities providing infrastructure or facilitating infrastructure and connecting that and de-siloing and making all the impacts that we want to make on everybody's lives. And the more that we do that, the more success we'll have. One of the things I always say, infrastructure begets more infrastructure. The more we build, the more we will build. And the more we can learn from each other, the more successful we're going to be. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Well, the MTA has been recognized for sort of innovation and financing for its accessibility improvements. Can you share a bit more about some of the specific examples of those approaches and the impact they've been made, and how it sort of fits into your overall capital improvement plan?
Sure thing. First, I'm going to piggyback on what Tom just said about P3s. We've had a very good success with P3s ourselves. 3 years ago, we issued about $1.2 billion of work for 21 elevators. And that company that work went to 3 separate companies who bid for it, and they provided private financing, the construction, and maintenance of those 21 elevators. So they fronted the money, which we love. But what I love even more than that was that for the first time, the trend of elevator availability and maintenance of private elevators, which if you do some Googling, you'll see that we had been struggling with that. We do a good job maintaining our assets. Third-party, private buildings who have some of our infrastructure in there didn't do such a good job. These 21 elevators are working amazingly because there is a financial incentive for these private companies to maintain those assets at the level that we prescribe. And if they don't, well, we dock their pay. And that has worked out really well for us. It was an attractive bid. Top companies bidded for it, and the work has been amazing. So I'm going to piggyback on 3Ps. Great success with that. A second one that I'll talk about here has been a ratification that we introduced 3 years ago as well to the building code here in New York City, where now we have a program called Zoning for Accessibility. Working with the Department of City Planning, the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, and City Hall, we were able to ratify the building code and introduce this new law that compels any developer that's building within the vicinity of our transit stations to come to us. They're required to come to the MTA and either offer us an easement in their footprint so that when we have capacity, we can go out and build another elevator, escalator, stair to expand egress into that station. Or if they so choose to do that investment themselves, then they can construct and maintain that asset, and they get a real nice bonus for it. They get to build a higher building or a more dense structure than they could have otherwise. So it's a really attractive tool for the private sector. The developers are loving it. We already saw the very first one just last month open in Queensboro Plaza Station, a private building, and they loved the exchange. It is a huge elevator, and the community in Queens is really loving it. So those are two very specific examples of how we at the MTA are also innovating our financial structures and delivering to the public a much better program, much better operation, and availability.
Thanks so much, Kamal. Those are fantastic examples. I think highlight that this is not just a question about finding the cheapest source of capital, but really aligning incentives, bringing the right people for the tasks. Eli, I'd like to turn to you. And given Accenture's global reach and your experience, how are you thinking about how the U.S. compares in terms of investment trends, challenges, P3s, and what might we learn from that global perspective?
In terms of overall investment trends, we're definitely in a better place today because of the IIJA. Hello. IIJA, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Plan. But there's still a long way to go, as many of you know here, to sustain our current levels of investment over the next 10 years. We need about $9.1 trillion. And we have a gap of about 3.7 trillion currently at the moment. Our colleagues from the American Society of Civil Engineers here have given us a grade of C overall for the infrastructure in the U.S. We ranked lowest in transit and highest in ports. We ranked D in transit and B in ports. To me, it's clear someone needs to step in to cover some of that infrastructure gap. It either comes from the government or the private side. It seems that the current U.S. administration wants to take a step back and allow some of the more private financing piece to come in. Worldwide infrastructure spending is still increasing quite heavily. We're currently at $9 trillion spend per annum at the moment, which is quite a significant increase from 2012, which was about $4 trillion annually. The Asia-Pacific market specifically is primarily driving 60% of that infrastructure growth coming from China, although that growth may change now with the tariffs and some of the dynamics that we're seeing economically worldwide. But beyond that, in terms of how we compare with emerging economies and some international models, it's clear that beyond funding, we have some fundamental issues in terms of how we deliver infrastructure projects. Here in the U.S., one can say that there's overregulation, a lot of red tape in comparison with our peers globally, and that is causing us some setbacks in terms of our ability to deliver infrastructure projects.
Thanks, Eli. I think this could be a good segue into a bit of a policy discussion. We have, as we've been talking about, IIJA is up for reauthorization next year. I think that's both a challenge, but also an opportunity. So, Tom, I'd like to turn to you. What do you hope to see, or what types of policy changes do you think might either address some of those challenges that Eli flagged, or otherwise encourage investment from the private sector?
Yeah, I think I mentioned momentum earlier, and the momentum that we're sustaining here towards reauthorization. I think that's really important, that we continue what we're making investments in and what we have planned. Yeah, one of the unfortunate, I think, byproducts of IIJA was that there were a whole bunch of projects that were ready to go, kind of shovel ready for P3s or other alternative delivery models with some private finance involved that were put on pause when IIJA passed, because I think there was kind of this camp out there that said, okay, we're good. The federal government is going to fund everything. Private capital will call you when we need you. And then we ran into, that those dollars didn't go as far as we expected them. As we're all talking about, we ran into the constraints like inflation and construction costs and labor shortages and everything else. But I think the opportunity to have momentum on these long-term plans and these long-term projects, I think is going to be critical. And I think for reauthorization, I think we can start talking about things like increasing private activity bond caps, providing incentives for private capital, monetization of assets. You know, and I come back to what I would say at NGA all the time: flexibility for states. Flexibility for state governments to utilize the tools in the toolbox to advance the projects that they've been planning for so carefully for so long. And we'll be right there as private capital ready to support that and move that forward.
That's great. I mean, there's clearly a lot to be done as 2026 approaches, but I think the reminder of thinking about states, but also, of course, cities, counties, others, and the role in delivering infrastructure.
Oh, and permitting. We'll fix that.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll fix permitting, yes. And then we'll be good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this comes back to that real often disconnect between just the time either in which we would like to get a project done versus what actually happens, or also what sort of people, like everyday people, think it should, how long it should take to get a project done. And I think that certainly on the policy side, that is one of the challenges I'm sure we keep coming back to, is like, well, we passed, didn't we fix that with a law passed in 2021? Why is it not built yet? But yeah, I think kind of connecting to the on the ground work really is critical. And so, Kamal, I think from the MTA perspective, how do you think about, like, there's the scale of the challenge, because there's so much of this with a city as large and dense and complicated as New York. How to balance the kind of overall work that you're doing around modernization with making sure that all projects are really enhancing accessibility. How do you try to tackle that?
That's a really tough one. I'll say, but you see it in our ability to deliver projects like the third track in the LIR, amazing project, on time, under budget, but we didn't stop the operations out there. We were able to do it contemporaneously with good service, the service that people are expecting, the service that gets people to work every day. You see it with Grand Central Madison, where we never interrupted services upstairs with Grand Central trains going in and out all but 2 hours of the day. And we were literally blasting rock 140 feet below to construct that $12 billion project, which already has become the 5th largest transportation hub in America. So we are able to innovate, we are able to build faster, build better, without ever losing focus on the service that customers rely on. Here in New York, we're still moving 4 million people a day in our transit system, 2 million in buses, and about 250,000 in each of the railroads. So we are we're laser focused on service delivery, but it is a balance. It's a tough balance. People tell me all the time, Q, how do you sleep at night? You have $30 billion, and you tell us that it's going to take you 30 years to build a fully accessible transit system. And I say, I sleep lightly, because I'm able to deliver the service that people require and are accustomed to today, and that is the balancing act. What good is a new elevator if I have to close down the station to add that elevator? Today, we're doing both. We're investing those $30 billion to redesign our infrastructure here and deliver an accessible transit system so that all New Yorkers have an equal opportunity to move on their own time and to benefit and access all that the city and state have to offer, but also not forgetting what's missing, not forgetting that, yes, we have this ecosystem, 490 stations that are 120 years old, but we will innovate. We will build things like the IBX, which is going to connect over 500,000 people that today have to traverse Manhattan to get to Brooklyn or Queens from the other. Well, we're going to build the first light rail here in New York City, and we're going to do it with the most innovative technology out there, ensuring that every one of those new stations is accessible, that connects those 17 lines that it will intersect with, but also without ever stopping our bus transit operation or our subway system. So that is the balancing act that we do, not losing focus on the fact that there are better things out there, there's ways to do it faster. An example would be our direct-to-platform designs, where we are now building elevators, particularly on the outdoor stations, that are going directly to the platform, bypassing a mezzanine, and ensuring that whatever engagement is happening at the mezzanine today is also provided to that customer should they be interested or want it at the platform level. So we are innovating, but also keeping our North Star on that service that customers expect today.
I mean, that really sounds like it's working on like literally multiple tracks at the same time, right? There's these long-term projects, but you also have to keep the trains running, but also deliver these big changes. And it's sort of like personally, I remember the first time walking into Grand Central Madison, it's kind of like when there's construction happening, it seems like it's going on forever, it's never going to end. And then you walk in, you're like, wow, this just came here all of a sudden, and it's transformative. And so I think that that type of success can help with that disconnect that we've been talking about. It's like the desire for big change, but also the recognition that it does take time, and some things move faster than others. And maybe on the sort of faster moving side of things, Eli, I'd like to get your thoughts on some of the technology that is impacting and creating opportunities for P3 projects globally, whether it's around digital twins, data, artificial intelligence, of course. How do you see that as fitting into the equation?
Yeah. So Accenture sees a lot of promise in terms of leveraging technology to help with the delivery of infrastructure and capital projects. That's why I guess I have a job. We actually conducted a survey for 700 leaders responsible for large-scale infrastructure projects around the globe, across 23 countries and different industries. And rather surprisingly, 92% of capital projects are not delivered on time or on budget. Most organizations, on average, overspend on their infrastructure projects by 29%. You can see that the problem is quite chronic in our industry. In fact, the larger a project gets and the more complex it gets, the more delays that you have, the more over budget that you have. I can use California high-speed rail as an example. Originally contemplated at $33 billion. Right now, it's over $120 billion estimated to be completed. It's quite the increase. Having said that, we found that technologies such as project management information systems, PMIS, digital twin, AI offer the greatest predictor in terms of increased success on delivery infrastructure projects. These tools help forecast risks early, they help enhance productivity, they automate tracking, and improve cost and schedule control. I would say that technology in our industry really is a low-hanging fruit, which will have the greatest and most immediate impact on infrastructure delivery here in the US and globally. In 2023, Accenture announced a $3 billion investment in AI, and we're currently developing a whole bunch of cool tools and gadgets internally, some of them currently in prototype, others not so much. A couple examples: Control Tower, offering real-time project oversight and risk management; Connected Construction, offering digital field operation and collaboration; but others as well, like Accenture Doorstep for community engagement transparency, Accenture Intelligent Mobility app, which is an AI-driven mobility management software. And interestingly, the construction industry is one that has been slow to adopt technology. There's a lot of fragmentation in our supply chain, and there's a chronic underinvestment in technology. But we're also seeing that the top performers are starting to deploy new technologies, including AI, and building robust data foundations to set themselves up for success in the future.
Thanks, Eli. I think that connection between sort of the scale and like the size of a project and how delayed and over budget it typically is such a pervasive challenge. So if any sort of technology tools can help sort of break that direct correlation, I think that gives us some reason for optimism. Tom, I'd like to turn back to you. Like, Meridiam has done a lot of work on sustainable and resilient infrastructure in particular. As you think about solutions there, what role can innovative financing methods play in that, and what role can this private sector in particular take in de-risking what could otherwise often be fairly challenging investments?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's our entire business model. That's our ethos. We were founded on this principle that sustainable infrastructure is a complete and total business model package that the private sector needed to engage in with private sector capital for the long term, and that's the foundation of Meridiam's business. We started thinking about this a long time ago, and I think too often those things are looked at as trade-offs. You know, how much do I spend on resiliency, or how much can I afford on resiliency or sustainability efforts? Where if you look over the course of the long-term investment in these assets, the two become one and the same, and it becomes a really good business model. One of the things, you know, I talked about our floodgates at the Port of Miami, or the Port of Miami Tunnel, but down at the Long Beach Courthouse in California is another example where I was out there, and they have this big open roof that's about 4 or 5 stories high, and the under part of it is lined with this this beautiful like Brazilian wood that no state project would ever invest in. I mean, it's like opulent. It's ridiculous. There's no need for it. No state or county or municipal government would make that decision for that building. But it's 4 stories up. We don't have to maintain it. We don't have to clean it. It is providing an extra layer of some kind of fire retardant that lowers our insurance premiums on that building. What that means, what that translates to is we don't have to spend money or time hiring scaffolding and crews to go up there at different intervals throughout 40 years to maintain that product. We're not going to have to change it. We're not going to have to disrupt anybody using that busy courthouse to do all of those things. And when you extrapolate all that out across 40 years, it becomes a no-brainer to put that up there. Like, that's the only thing that you would put up there if you're thinking about it that way. You would never do it if you're just investing in building it, but you would almost have to do it if you're responsible for it for the long term. So that sustainability ethos comes through in everything that we do. Whether it's the energy efficiency, and I can go for a long time on the baggage handling system at LaGuardia and how sustainable and cost saving that is, but Rory's flashing signs. But anyway, all that to say, sustainability is good business when you think about it long term. It's effective investment when you think about it long term, and it's at the forefront of everything that we do. So.
This is such a good example of the importance of the time horizon, right? And thinking about who, even with a private partner, like, yes, any private partner is going to ultimately be profit motivated because that's why they're in business. But aligning the goals of the project with those financial goals of the private partner are critical, because a rational decision for someone that is planning to own and operate a facility for 40 years is going to look very different than someone who is planning to flip it in 2 years, right? Yeah. And it's not, it's not to say that that either of those companies is doing a bad thing, but like as in you're choosing public partner, making sure that you are aligning with what's a success for them is critical.
Absolutely, and how people use it every day.
Yeah. So I think we're going to go to questions, and love to get any one from the audience.
Tom, we'll push back maybe on something that Tom was saying. That I do agree that infrastructure is about big numbers and long time horizons. I mean, Julia Prescott's been working at New Connect, your interconnector project at Meridian for many years, and a lot of projects do take an awful long while. But on the other hand, there are also an awful lot of projects that don't necessarily cost a lot of money and create a lot of impact. I'm thinking maybe in London, for instance, making Transport for London made data available so that people know when the bus is going to arrive. That's not an expensive project, it just requires a lot of thought. But what is consistent in all of these, whether they're big, whether they're small, is government policy. Government policy being consistent, government policy being structured in a way that as an investor that it's going to be there for the next 30 years, it's going to be actually underpinning what you're doing. Do you find, or how does a business like Meridian, and how does the private investment community navigate what globally we can only describe as quite turbulent times in all governments around the world, as we find governments are having to address new and unforeseen kind of priorities which are affecting their ability to make that long-term policy?
Yeah, I'll kind of answer that from the perspective of both having spent my entire career in the public sector, but then also from the private sector experience at Meridian now, is that there's, those trade-offs are always going to be there. And I guess at the first end, it's opening from the public sector the opportunity to rethink and open the aperture on what is possible, what your priorities are, and what the best solution is for the piece of infrastructure that you're looking to invest in. It's the right model is not for each piece, or I'm sorry, the one model is not for every piece of infrastructure. Every piece of infrastructure that we invest in is its own special, unique circumstance. But aligning those priorities and aligning the funding, financing mechanisms for it and how it fits into the overall system is something that I think globally, using as wide an interpretation of that word as possible, that we need to open the aperture on, and we can start learning from each other. And, that push and pull of priorities over the years is something that I think our infrastructure, I don't want to say falls victim to, but it is subject to over the years. And so you end up with deferred maintenance on some things because you need to kind of put that over here for a little bit, and then we have another priority year after year. When it comes to certain things that you're going to make the decision on to say we want this to be maintained for the long term, then that's where the P3 model can kind of come into effect and say, there's no deferred maintenance on P3 projects. So those are just kind of the things that I think we should be thinking about as we're looking to invest in an entire portfolio of assets, whether you're a state, local government, federal government. Yeah. So I think does that answer your question a little bit?
Do you feel that consistency of policy is harder today than it perhaps was 10 years ago?
One of the things I kind of touched on this one in my remarks earlier. I think we've been through a number of cycles of change, and long-term intentional private capital has been there through that. I think from Meridian's perspective as long-term investors, which I think is a little bit unique, we've been flying that plane pretty steady for the last 20 years. And there's been a lot of turbulence, to your point. But I think the proof has shown out in our assets that have weathered through that. And yeah, there's some bumps along the way, but overall, pretty steady flying, I think. Thanks.
Any other questions?
And I love hearing about the achievements that the MTA has made with this accessibility. I heard about this program that they're doing out in Seattle where they're actually following individuals with diverse needs through the community and documenting that, having a photo library of their experience. And I'm just curious if that's something that could be applicable here, just to really convey the benefits and the impact of the investment that the MTA is making.
That sounds like a really fun endeavor. However, I'd say that here in New York we have monthly committee meetings and board meetings where we have very active people who love to come and tell us their experience. They are not shy here in New York. They do it twice a month, and boy, are they loud.
With more projects kind of moving towards the P3 model and it becoming more popular, are you seeing a change from just the initial cost to emphasis on life cycle cost monitoring analysis as part of, kind of the bids and the winning of the projects?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. It's part of the overall trend, I think, towards that model is thinking about things in terms of overall life cycle costs, so that, and I expanded that question. We spent a lot of time, I mentioned all the conversations that Ross was putting together for Infrastructure Week last week, and I kind of found myself coming back to this notion that the more we invest in overall life cycle costs through the entire term of projects, the less we'll be back in DC asking for dollars for deferred maintenance. The higher I think where's Tom? The higher I think Tom's grades are going to be, 4 years, 8 years, 12 years down the line, if we start doing that more and more and investing for the long term. So
I think everyone agrees to that in theory. I'm just wondering from the practical side of it, are you actually seeing, kind of it coming through in terms of who's being picked for delivery? Are you actually seeing it come into action, I guess?
I think so. Maybe. Yes. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're going to say yes.
Okay, great.
Loudly. Oh,
There you go.
there it is. Getting back to the financing and sustainable resilient infrastructure, one of the issues that comes up a lot is that investors, developers don't exactly know what it is, and that there's a need for some sort of labeling system, standards, et cetera. And I know Meridian has been involved with something called Fast Infra. There's also Blue Dot Network that perhaps Tom wants to say a word about, but I'm also really interested in hearing both from Accenture or MTA's perspective. Is it very clear for you all to know what it is that you're looking for and investing in, and is that sort of labeling system helpful if it were more uniformly acknowledged and accepted?
I mean, I'll say thinking back to my time in the public sector, it was difficult to quantify what those investments were and what that meant for our investment. And so, having more quantifiable ties to things that are sometimes very much not quantifiable is, I think, good and a mark towards progress in how we're doing this. And I talked about evolution and maturity in this market, and it's really been something that I think has been growing over recent years. And as I see him over there in the corner, I know that Rory's been taking part in a lot of those conversations as well in the Fast Infra label, and I think it's really great progress that Meridian is at the forefront of. But sorry, I don't want to dominate. You guys were good.
I'd say absolutely. And we have many learnings already from things like design build, which allow us to hit the parameters, the sketches of what it is that we're looking for, and really let the market tell us how to do it best. Let them bring in all the innovation that they have access to. But I would say absolutely yes, in that the people that are bidding for those projects are innovators in their field, are really top of the line, and they see the value in these investments. So I think we see that, yes, in the faces that are coming through, the output of those projects, but we have lessons already on how we can tell them exactly what we're looking for and let them tell us the best way to get there.
Nothing else to add from my end, and I don't want to stand in the way for lunch and see the gentleman
No,
over there,
please
so-
do. Take your time, because I've got a question for you, actually.
Nothing to add from my end. Thank you.
So, first of all, let's have a round of applause for the panelists. I mean, it's brilliant. So, please stay where you are. I have two questions, one for the panel and one for Ross, who I'm going to invite up shortly. I spend 40% of my time working finance. As I said, I come from a QS background, so I can use an Excel document. Do finance actually think they've got a better grasp of digital solutions and their outcomes more than asset owners who are supposed to be employing those asset owners? Do you think that driver could come for change from that financial market? Tom, do you want to go first on that?
I think it's got to be a combination of both. Mm-hmm. It's got to be an active feedback loop on what's possible and what everybody's trying to accomplish. And that works both ways. Yep. I think the public sector can drive the innovations as much as the private sector can drive the innovations for each other and say, okay, this is how our public is going to experience this infrastructure. This is how we want them to experience this investment that we're making in our infrastructure. How do we measure that? And then, that can go both ways. On the flip side of that, it's okay, we have these solutions, we have these partners, these networks, this is what we've done somewhere else. is this useful for you, or here's how you could achieve that goal. So that active, dynamic feedback loop as projects are evolving and being developed, I think is absolutely critically important.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think you're right on the money. I think that could be a difference maker. I think there's a lot of institutional money here in the U.S. That is waiting on the sidelines, waiting for the ripe conditions to invest, so to speak. And I do think, from a digital perspective, from a technology perspective, AI, et cetera, it could really make the difference in terms of encouraging some of the people that are sitting on the sidelines to finally roll up their sleeves and dive in. I think it's easier said than done. I think a lot of people are going to want to see it proved first. It's going to take some time. But I think that will be the disruptor in our industry, personally speaking.
I think, as a science fiction author has said that the future's already here, but it's just not evenly distributed. And I think that applies extremely well to what we're talking about, which is we have a range of stakeholders, from individual residents of a city through to construction companies, to financiers, asset owners, all of whom have very different relationships with technology. They adopt new technology on a different time scale, right? Some want to be at the cutting edge, others want to wait to see that it's been 100% de-risked. And I think managing that, let alone with the differences in resources from a city like New York to a much smaller municipality, I think it is critical both for these types of gatherings, but also I want to give a shout out to Ross and Accelerator for America and the Innovative Infrastructure Initiative, like working directly with communities to help them see what's possible and to learn from each other, people who have gone through a procurement, who have bought a new solution that worked out or didn't work out, and to have open conversations about those tools, about technology, about the roles that it plays. I think that can help build a future that is where it's much more equitable growth ultimately.
I think you guys are bridging a lot of that gap at Sidewalk, so I just didn't want to leave that unsaid either.
We're trying our best, yes.
But just picking that up, I think the one thing, as I said, that the first event we did of this in 2022, we actually had a very strong mix of finance, legal, asset owners, and it came very much highlighted the difference in outcomes that each one was looking for, the difference in data, and actually sitting them on the stage. And it got quite, for an English event, heated, I think is quite a nice way to play it, because each one had a very siloed mentality of what they were asked. And coming from a contract point of view, that's what my contract said, that's what I will provide. So actually bringing people together, creating that more holistic view, what data do you need, why do you need it? It's not about the actual delivery of the project, it's that long tail of managing it. I think this is where that collaboration, and we're seeing now contracts, so you mentioned the magic word of AI. I've been working with underwriters on how to use AI, a digital twin, for reinsurance. So you're going to see this new wave of influence coming from where it's maybe traditionally been the government or the asset owner. I think finance is going to have its own feather in the cap of doing that influence. But again, thank you, panelists. Please stay there. So, Ross, this is where I get to drag you up to give your reflection. But I'd like to start with one question. It's something you've all said. We were discussing last night with ASCE at dinner. The appetite for PPP or triple P or 3P, whatever name we used to call it, PFI, is becoming more, shall we say, a global appetite. So if you've now got 50 states entering the market, with California, the fourth biggest economy in the world, looking for this, what impact is that going to put globally? And also, how are people going to have to be adapted, resilient, to not only attract the money, but de-risk that loan? I'd love an answer from you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really excellent question. First and foremost, we have to have state legislatures passing laws that are going to allow for such models to be implemented in 50 states. But I think the prime thing is, over the last several years, there's been an influx of global investment in the United States. We're obviously a very hot market here, and we're looking now at a moment in time where some of those investments might go by the wayside because of changes in policy. So to keep that market here, we need project owners across localities, counties, state governments to really be looking at you all in this room, what the potential could be. And that requires a dialogue, a real good faith dialogue between the private market and the public market on how to deliver those projects. I mean, there's not much forgiveness for an elected official when it comes to innovation. Innovation that goes south can very quickly lead to that person no longer having a job. So
I was going to say, because that goes right into, I'm going to throw David Porter under the bus here. He's going to be talking about the intelligent client. So you, as that official, are the intelligent client.
Perfect. Well, what I was just going to say is, I mean, really, we need models that have been talked about up here, like in Miami, like in New York with the elevators, like in Kansas City with the airport, really highlighting these stories of successful P3 models so that other elected officials around the country can feel more daring to go forth in these conversations, to bring them to their city councils, to really say that we can do this effectively without wasting taxpayer dollars and be good stewards of these projects. So I think it's very, very important that we continue telling these stories, because infrastructure is not easy to tell the story of. I think we've seen that over the last several years of the IIJA. It's very hard to talk about some of these initial investments because infrastructure by nature is meant to be taken for granted. You're not supposed to think about how you get from point A to point B. When you do start to think about it is when that is disrupted. And so you're always going to hear about the bad cases. You're not going to hear about the good ones. And we need to flip the script, especially right now in this moment, to show that orange cones are not an impediment, they mean progress. And that's very hard to convey. I think what we have over the last 3 years of the IIJ is telling the initial stories of some of the job creation that's coming. But, inking a deal with a private financier for a 40-year timeline of a project is not super sexy. It's not going to get somebody reelected. So we need to give them more fun things and sexy things to talk about, and innovative technologies, and the way that we can leverage AI to advance urban planning, to advance the things that elected leaders really want to hear about, is probably a good avenue to do it.
Well, again, keeping it international, a real good example of that is the Experience Centre that Brisbane did. So Brisbane did an Experience Centre for Cross River Rail. They then won the Olympics, and now it's a city experience centre that anyone can go to. And what is important there, you have children of 7 years age going in and actually seeing how cool construction engineering is, playing with Xbox controllers. I'm sure they have an extra digit because they can work it so much better than anybody else. But that is then sexy for your politicians.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I will let you have the floor and sum up.
I don't want to keep folks from lunch. I'm just going to take a couple seconds just to recap a couple things that we've heard today that I think are really important. One of them is what I just talked about. Telling the story of infrastructure is very, very difficult to do. And something that both Mayor Nuremberg said and the Lieutenant Governor talked about were the need to really make some of these investments human-centered. So the mayor, I thought, did an excellent job of talking about what the 8-cent sales tax in San Antonio passed in 2020 means in a human capital perspective, the jobs that are being created, that change in household income that happens when that person gets that credential, when they get that training, and what it means on a return on investment perspective to San Antonio. Yes, you are spending $6,000 per person, but you are getting triple that, quadruple that back. When you look at the long term of that person now going into a field. So that's really, really important. And of course, what the Lieutenant Governor talked about around the tragedy with the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the tragedy on I-695, and what that means for road workers and for the people that are actually doing the maintenance here. They really need to prioritize safety to keep us all safe as users of the roads and the people that are making them, constructing them for us. So that I thought that was very, very important to put at the front here. And then partnership. I mean, this room is built around partners. I think I see a lot of faces that I know and work a lot with here, and that's because we've developed a true sense of what each other does and what we each bring to a project. I think there's a project doesn't happen without 50 plus partners here, and fostering them and maintaining them and managing them allows Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor to call upon those partners in a moment of crisis and act effectively, because they know what each person's going to bring to the table, and they don't need to have a whole bunch of conversations and planning and pre-planning meetings because they can just go right there because they trust each other. So that's incredibly important as well. I think a last thing that I just want to bring to the fore here is around partnership is also allows for good faith discussions and dialogues and debates around policies that we need to address and change. I think up here we've talked already today about the permitting processes. Everyone in the infrastructure space is talking about permitting right now. And it's because we did this large-scale IIJ experiment that has stakeholders now in the smallest communities in the country and the largest who all have a seated interest in making sure that those dollars come to ground. So we are all looking for ways and policies on how we can get those dollars to ground faster. So that's incredibly important. And the user fee model. I mean, this is something we've not really taken a hard, serious look at. It's something that we all, well, the gas tax is not really working, the highway trust fund is not really working. And now I think there's a true consensus approach that we need to address this. We're gonna work in good faith to find a model that might work. Is it a long shot? It still could be, but I think there's a lot of energy around it right now. And I have a lot of hope for how Chairman Capito and Ranking Member Whitehouse and how Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson are going to work together to build us a next legislation that's going to hopefully continue these investments, and it's up to us to keep pushing for that. So with that, Mark, I will turn it back to you to send these lovely people to lunch.
Lovely. No, I'm good. So,
you're good.
Thank you. Absolutely brilliant, sir. So as promised earlier, I'm going to give you a full hour and 5 minutes for lunch. Please, it's outside. We'll be back in here. You've obviously seen how good the first half. I'm promising you better. I had arranged scones for afternoon break, but unfortunately, I'm having a discussion with my team about that later. But please, go out, enjoy, network, communicate, discuss, and come back in about 1:05. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you, panelists. Thank you.
That was awesome. It was great. It was great.